The heavy wooden door to the principal's office creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with the scent of old leather and polished wood. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Davenport, a statuesque woman in her late 40s with cascading auburn hair and piercing green eyes, stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed the door behind her with a soft click, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Principal Thompson. He sat behind his imposing desk, his silver hair neatly combed back, his blue eyes cold and calculating. He was older, in his early 60s, but his presence commanded respect, or fear. Today, however, there was something different in his gaze, something that sent a shiver down Mrs. Davenport's spine. "Mrs. Davenport," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "I believe we need to have a conversation." She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, what is it about?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled together. "It has come to my attention that you've been distracted lately. Your performance as a teacher has been slipping, and I believe we both know why." Her breath caught in her throat. How much did he know? Had he discovered their secret affair? Panic flared in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, her expression carefully blank. "I don't know what you mean, sir." Principal Thompson's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she thought he might erupt. Instead, he stood slowly, rounding the desk until he stood before her, towering over her like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Don't play games with me, Mrs. Davenport. I know about you and James." Her world tilted on its axis. James was her husband, and the words "you and James" felt like a punch to the gut. She took a step back, her legs trembling beneath her. "James? What does he have to do with anything?" Principal Thompson's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, you think this is about our little tryst? No, Mrs. Davenport. This is about revenge." Her mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Revenge? For what? Her infidelity? But how could he know? "James found out about us," Principal Thompson continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "And he didn't take it well. Do you remember the night you left the school late, after our meeting?" She nodded slowly, images flashing through her mind, the dark hallways, the whispered promises, the heat of their bodies pressed together. "Well, someone saw you, someone who knew exactly who you were and where you were going, and that person told James." Ice flooded her veins. Who? Who told him? Principal Thompson chuckled darkly. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that James came to me, demanding answers. And now, he wants payback." Mrs. Davenport felt like she was drowning, the walls closing in around her. "What are you saying? What does he want?" Principal Thompson reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "He wants to make you suffer, just as you made him suffer, and I'm going to help him." Fear gripped her heart, squeezing tight. "Please, you can't do this. I'll lose everything, my job, my marriage, my reputation." Principal Thompson's eyes glinted with malice. "Oh, I think you'll find that losing those things is only the beginning." Before she could react, he grabbed her arm, his grip iron tight. She tried to pull away, but he only tightened his hold, dragging her towards the large oak desk. "No, please, let me go." He ignored her cries, shoving her onto the desk so that her legs dangled off the edge. She struggled, but his weight pinned her down, his lips curling into a sneer. "This is what you get for betraying your husband, Mrs. Davenport." Tears streamed down her face as she fought against him, but it was no use. Principal Thompson was relentless, his hands roaming over her body with intent. "Stop it! Get off me!" He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "You brought this on yourself. Now, you'll learn what it means to be truly broken." Just as he was about to force himself upon her, the door burst open with a bang, and James strode in, his face twisted with rage. "Get your hands off my wife." Principal Thompson hesitated, then released Mrs. Davenport, standing to face James. "Ah, the cuckold himself. Come to watch the fun?" James's eyes burned with fury as he glared at Principal Thompson. "If you touch her again, I swear I'll kill you." Principal Thompson laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Such passion. But let's not forget, you're here because you want to see her suffer." James's gaze flickered to Mrs. Davenport, who lay crumpled on the desk, her dress disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. He looked back at Principal Thompson, his jaw clenched. "I want to see justice, not this perversion." Principal Thompson shrugged. "Fine, then let's make it a family affair." He turned to Mrs. Davenport, who was struggling to sit up, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Looks like you're not getting off that easy, darling. Your husband wants a piece of the action too." Mrs. Davenport's heart sank as James approached, his expression unreadable. "James, please, don't do this, please." James stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of sympathy, but then it was gone, replaced by a coldness she had never seen before. "You betrayed me," he said softly, but with such venom that it made her blood run cold. "Now, you'll pay." Mrs. Davenport shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, James, I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you." James's eyes hardened. "Love? You don't know the meaning of the word." With that, he reached out, his hand wrapping around her wrist. She cried out, trying to pull away, but his grip was unyielding. "James, please." Principal Thompson watched with a satisfied smirk. "Let's see how much she really loves you now." James pulled her closer, his mouth inches from hers. "Tell me, Emily, do you still want to be my wife?" Her voice trembled as she spoke. Yes, I do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But James wasn't listening. He leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was anything but tender. It was brutal, punishing, a reminder of the pain she had caused him. Mrs. Davenport sobbed into his mouth, her body shaking with fear and despair. She had lost everything, her career, her dignity, and now, it seemed, her husband's love. As James deepened the kiss, Principal Thompson stepped back, watching with a predatory grin. "Feel free to take your time. After all, this is just the beginning." Mrs. Davenport's mind screamed for escape, but there was no way out. She was trapped, caught between the man who had once loved her and the one who now sought to destroy her. James finally pulled away, breathing heavily, his eyes searching hers. Say it again. Say you love me. She nodded frantically, desperate to salvage whatever she could. I love you, James. I always have. But there was no forgiveness in his gaze, only bitterness. Too little, too late. With that, he pushed her back onto the desk, looming over her as Principal Thompson watched with dark amusement. Now, let's see how much you really mean it, James growled, his hands moving to undo his belt. Mrs. Davenport's heart broke as she realized that her betrayal had sealed her fate. There was no redemption, no mercy, only the cruel truth of revenge. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please.